there are still people in journalism out here trying to do the good work and fighting the hard fights at a time that it seems people care about that less and less, even outside the playground. But Jim Trotter has been doing a great job inside of sports for a long time, and he's an award-winning national columnist for The Athletic. And he's a former reporter for NFL Media, and he settled a lawsuit with them because I'm just going to say generally, it seems like it's difficult sometimes to just do your job when you're Jim Trotter. Try to correctly do journalism when you've got a lot of entities banging around against you that don't allow you to have like some editorial freedom. So he's joining us now. And I don't know how dangerous it is for him to join us now, because I'm not looking to get you in trouble here, Jim, but I am looking to understand what happened with your column in The Athletic. It was headlined, "When it comes to political expression, does the NFL have double standards?" And it's about what happened with Nick Bosa, which I don't think was covered very much. Let's play for everybody the video. Nick Bosa is clearly MAGA and is proud of it, but not so proud of it that he'll keep answering questions about MAGA after doing this after a game the other day.
I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I think it's an important time.
So he's just saying it's an important time, but there's video of him crashing an interview with a MAGA hat.
Yeah, to give people the context, Melissa Stark on Sunday Night Football is in the post-game interview, and he photobombs it or video bombs it wearing the MAGA hat. And you can see him at the beginning of the video put the hat on, and then he walks right in between Melissa Stark and the players she's interviewing and points to the hat. And
then doesn't want to answer any questions afterwards. So, Jim Trotter, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry for how meandering the introduction was, but can you walk us through what's happened with the last couple of days? Because it seems, I don't know what's factual here, but it seems like the column was edited in a way that you were a little uncomfortable with. But what's true here for you? And thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I think what I've put out is what I felt at the time. I have to say, was it the right thing to do? Probably not. But I think what happens, Dan, is that, and speaking only for myself, I think as a Black man and as a journalist, there are times that there are things that are so important that I feel compelled to speak on it. Because the thing with Donald Trump and this whole MAGA thing is that so many people want to normalize it, and so many people want to normalize the behavior. And the point that I make is that it may be normal to you and it may be a joke to you, as it appeared to be with Nick Bosa, who wouldn't stand 10 toes down and talk about why he supported a certain candidate. But for me and people who look like me, it is a threat. It is a real threat to our life in terms of the practices that are being put in place, the policies, and the general attitude. So I think I got a little frustrated at that moment, and I tweeted out something that I probably shouldn't have tweeted out. And, you know, I don't want to get into all of that because, you know, I could be violating the company's policy. I will just say that I got a little emotional about it. I felt some kind of way about it, and I reacted. The larger point here, which is what I think you want to get at, is talking about the coverage of these things. And for me, why this column was so important and why in some ways it's disappointing that more people haven't taken up this discussion is that the NFL went out of its way after Colin Kaepernick first took a knee to try and take player political expression out of the game, to take it off of the field, I should say. Going so far as to in 2018, 2 years after Colin first took a knee, rewriting the anthem policy. And this is after player protests had basically died down. There were only a handful of players who were doing it. And the NFL went and rewrote the policy. And what was interesting to me about that is the night before they voted on that policy change, I had talked to a couple of owners who had told me they weren't going to vote for it. They didn't see any need to. There was no reason to rekindle that fire. And yet the next day, the vote was 30-0 with 2 abstentions in favor of changing the policy. And I'll never forget, I asked Mark Murphy about that, the Packers CEO, the next day. And he was pretty clear when he said, we don't want Trump weaponizing our game. And so for me, when Nick Bosa did what he did, the question became in my mind, is there a double standard within the NFL? Meaning, they're trying to take away political expression by Black players who are fighting against social injustice, but are okay with Nick Bosa wearing a MAGA hat, supporting a candidate whose very beliefs are what these Black players were protesting against. And so if the NFL was going to be silent on that, to me, it raised the question of whether they were more comfortable with a white player supporting a candidate whose beliefs and policies are a threat to these Black men more than they are comfortable with these Black men protesting against social injustice. And that was the column. And the NFL would not return my emails or my texts. So I don't know where the NFL stands on that at this point. Hopefully we will get a chance to ask them at some point, but I felt pretty compelled to speak on it.
Jim, I'm curious, what was in the version that you wanted, the director's cut, if you will?
Well, if I can cut you off there just real quick, I mean, because it sounds to me, just so that the audience can have all of the context here, whatever it is that happened with Jim before all of this, where he's fighting the NFL, and that's an unpleasant thing, where he's already gone through a settlement where he's had to fight the NFL. I would understand why somebody who's had to fight for several years might get emotional because a column's just being edited and he feels like his words are being changed. I don't want to speak for you here, but where a writer would get proprietary and get his backup about editing, but now we're getting into the weeds on how it is he does his job.
I'm not trying to figure out that process. Jim has made it clear he doesn't want to get into the process. I'm curious, what was the part that got left out?
Yeah, that's getting into the process. And so I can't really talk about that. What I will say to you is that I just feel really strongly that that the things that are happening now are being normalized, and these things are a threat to us. It's Nick Bosa. The thing that got me about what Nick Bosa did was the intentionality behind it, right? This was planned. And he thought it was cute in the moment, at least it appeared that way. But he didn't have the conviction afterward to stand and speak on it or to be questioned about it. And the thing that was disappointing too is I remember when he was drafted and he had all those tweets, MAGA tweets and everything else, and he called Colin Kaepernick a clown and all of those things. And the 49ers drafted him. And I felt it was important to ask him about it. So I flew up to San Francisco for his post-draft press conference. And I asked him about it. And he expressed contrition. And he said he was going to learn from all of that. San Francisco was the best place for him to be because he could learn from all these various groups within the city and everything else. And I thought, okay, he's a young man who deserves an opportunity to grow and to learn. And what I saw on Sunday night was someone who hasn't grown or learned at all. Realizing, not understanding again, that what he is representing or what he is speaking to is a direct threat to even those people in his locker room who don't look like him. And that's the thing I feel like, Dan, at times that people are listening, but they're not hearing us when we talk about the importance of this. And that's why I stand down on it and I keep speaking about it because it is a threat to my life and the life of people who look like me. And I'm not going to back off that. I'm not. And what it says to me when the NFL remains silent on this, what it says to me is that their pocketbook is more important than my life. And I'm not okay with that.
It's not just you saying it, though. You've been fighting for this in a way that I imagine has been very uncomfortable the last few years, fighting the NFL, and have since settled because of an assortment of opportunities that I think you're going to use to help people. Do you want to walk us through how uncomfortable it has been and what baggage you're bringing to writing on these stories when you're doing activism but trying to do it within an editorial process that's really constrictive because journalism's rigidities aren't allowing you to speak as freely as you can here, and the NFL's leaning on you and lawyers are leaning on you, and the whole thing seems super unpleasant from where I'm standing, even as people are going to accuse you, well, Jim got his money. Jim settled and got out, right, without knowing any of the details of the fight you just fought.
Right. It's funny. When I first filed a lawsuit there were folks who asked me, what do you want? And I would say to them, I want positive change. So what does positive change look like? Well, first and foremost, what I wanted was to have diverse representation in the management ranks of the NFL newsroom where I was working at the time. Again, I think people forget, if you're covering a player population that is 60 to 70% Black, and you have no Black managers in that newsroom, you have no Black copy editors on that desk, and you have no full-time Black employees on that news desk as news assistants, then how can you fairly cover these Black players, coaches, executives, etc.? So that was my point there. I wanted change there. What I was told is that legally, I could not force the NFL to hire a Black person in management within its newsroom. I could not force the NFL to have Black people at that decision-making table when they were deciding how players, coaches, and executives would be covered, who would cover them, and what the narrative of the story would be. So I said, what's the next thing I can do then to make change? And for me, it was trying to help this next generation that's coming along, to give them the resources that could help them become the journalists of tomorrow, to try and hold people like those in power at the NFL Network and other places accountable. And so in settling this lawsuit, one of the things that has taken place is that I was able to create a foundation. And I call it the Work, Plan, Pray Foundation, after someone who was so instrumental in my career, and that was Junior Seau, who when I broke into covering the NFL, took me under his wing to teach me about the mindset of an elite athlete, the culture of the NFL, the culture of a locker room, all those things that are so important to developing relationships to be able to do your job. Not to give you scoops, and anyone who knows Junior knows he protected the team fiercely, but to help me understand, that culture. And so with this foundation, what we're doing, or what I'm doing, is I'm going to provide monies and resources to this next generation of aspiring sports journalists and sports executives at HBCUs. And so at the moment, we are strategizing, and I've asked my board of directors, I've asked my advisors, take nothing off the table. Let's be as creative as we can be to say, how can we have the greatest impact on these young people coming up behind us? And within hopefully a few months, we'll go through that entire process, and then we will begin to help these young people who are the next generation.
It's quaint. It tells me next to nothing about what your last 4 years have been like, fighting the NFL and being run out of a league, or it seems
Dan,
like. Go ahead.
Can I say this to you, Dan? It wasn't that it was so much hard on me. To be perfectly frank, the hardest part in this whole process on me was when The Athletic told me I couldn't cover the NFL, after telling me before hiring me that it would not be an issue. That was the hardest part on me throughout this whole process. Standing up and fighting the NFL, I was comfortable with that. I knew what I was getting into. What I wasn't comfortable with, what I didn't fully understand, was the impact it would have on those around me. And that's what you have to be sensitive to if you get into this situation. For me personally, it wasn't a problem. It wasn't uncomfortable. But in terms of I didn't realize I was going to have I was going to have taken away from me the thing that I had made my name on, which was covering the NFL for 3 decades. That was the hardest part in this. Fighting the NFL was not hard for me.
Oh, but Jim, I'm asking you about consequences here. Yes, you're fighting for something that's obviously principled and on the right side of history. And of course, there are unintended consequences. You could go into a fight with all sorts of principles, and look at one of the consequences. This league that Jim Trotter loves, taught to him by Seau, with an appreciation for the accessibility Seau gave him while dying because of this game, for you to be pushed to the fringes of it or have to fight to be a part of it. Like, that's one of the unintended consequences that I think there'd be more of them than just one.
I can't speak to that, Dan. I can only speak for me. And it was important to me. It remains important to me. I asked the question during the summer of George Floyd if we were in a moment or a movement, because you had corporations that were bending over backwards all of a sudden to show that they were sympathetic and willing to listen to the concerns of Black people as it relates to social injustice. And at that time, I had people telling me, no, this is a movement. This is too strong. Look at all the various sports leagues and the corporations who were standing up and who were being receptive to what was being said. And now I look at it today, and I look at how many things have been rolled back. I look at how media companies are no longer receptive to that in the way that they were. Remember, the NFL, when I was working there, in 2018, when I got there, Steve Weish and I went to them with the idea of a podcast that would focus on issues that related primarily to Black coaches, players, and executives, to give a voice to issues that were not being addressed. We couldn't get approval for it. 2 years later, after George Floyd is murdered, the NFL comes to us and says, hey, remember that podcast you guys wanted to do?
Ah, yes. We care now.
Yeah, now they care. But now let's fast forward again.
Yeah, it's all. Just say it.
Yeah.
It's all.
Absolutely. It's performative.
It's all.
It's all performative.
It's all. He can't say it out loud because you got to settle the lawsuit and you actually have to help people with what the results of this fight are. But all of it is.
Actually, also a lot classier than you are.
Yes, he is classier than I am. Jim, thank you for the time. Appreciate the time and the work. And we'll tell people, again, he's doing the important stuff, and it's good to see that somebody is still out there doing it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jim.
Appreciate you, Dan.